Hello and welcome to another video, and today I'll be going over the front lines and updates regarding the war in Ukraine for the 6th of August. So I'm going to work my way up from Kherson to Kharkiv. So let's get through this. The biggest news out of this sector of the fighting is that HIMARS were destroyed in a wooded area near Stepnoye and Nikolaev, and the Russian Ministry of Defense, they provided some video footage of this. And honestly, this is just one of several cases of strikes on HIMARS. We've seen a lot of these videos, and that's probably one of the reasons why we haven't seen as many HIMARS strikes in the past few days and weeks. They've really run out of munitions, and the munitions that they did use that weren't destroyed in strikes by the Russian Air Force were used on the Antonovsky Bridge. They shot dozens of rockets towards that bridge, and sure, it did get damaged, but by next week it's supposed to be repaired. So at this point, it seems as if Russia does want them to strike the bridge again, because it's just going to deplete their resources when it could be used elsewhere. Now, to sort of offset the loss in munitions that Ukraine has suffered, the Biden administration, they are preparing another $1 billion in aid to Ukraine. And in this aid package, it includes more munitions for HIMARS, for the NASAM surface-to-air missiles, and up to 50 M113 armored medical transport vehicles. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. There are other packages being planned that will total up to like 8.8 billion, and yeah, it just shows that the U.S. isn't giving up on Ukraine. They're going to continue arming them for the time being, during this important month specifically. Now, a lot of this aid doesn't even reach the front lines. There was a very interesting CBS article talking about the U.S. weapon shipments, and what happens is the U.S. they produce it. Yeah, you have like Raytheon, Lockheed Martin. They make all the weapons and stuff, and then it gets shipped from the U.S. to Poland, and then it once it gets past to the Ukrainian border, that's when American oversight over their own weapons ends, and Ukraine is given the authority over what they do with these weapons. So a major problem with the Ukrainian administration is that there's a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of corruption, and then you have these weapons, they don't actually reach the front line. They go on like the black market, or they get sold elsewhere, and it isn't actually utilized in the final destination that it was supposed to be sent to. And that's according to Jonas Oman, and he's the CEO of Blue Yellow, which is a corporation that supplies the AFU units. And since he has a lot of like first-hand accounts, he understands the situation. He said that about only 30% of weapons even reach the front lines. So the other 70%, who knows where that is? But it's certainly not being used to help Ukraine in their war efforts. So that's a big problem that the United States has to deal with if they actually want these shipments to be effective. Because yeah, this is a huge waste of money. As of now, U.S. has spent like $26 billion on supporting Ukraine. They did pass a $40 billion aid package, but not all of that money has actually been sent to Ukraine yet. That's just the money that was authorized to be sent to, by Congress. Now, that's really it for Kherson. So I'm going to go on to the next sector of the fighting. So in Zaporizhia, not much news along these towns like Kamyanske, Orikhiv, Mariupol. What I'm really going to talk about is that the power plant, the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, was actually struck again by not a kamikaze drone this time, which is it was struck by one last time. This time it was struck by artillery. So Ukraine launched 3 artillery strikes on the power plant, and They launched 20 152 millimeter caliber shells, and this was carried out by the 45th Artillery Brigade in this town over here, which is called Marhanet. And the damage to the power plant was that two power lines were destroyed, and at least part of the compound was on fire, according to the videos. But there was no like radioactive spill. The gas or the um like oil reserves weren't hit or anything like that. So luckily, it's still intact for the most part, because it could have been a huge like ecological and environmental disaster for the people living around this area if that place had been hit. So Ukraine and Russia are trading blame for who actually launched the attack, but I feel like it's um, pretty clear that Ukraine was responsible because, first of all, Ukraine alleged previously that Russia stationed troops in here. So why would Russia be shelling their own troops, you know? And Ukraine would have all the reason to attack Russian positions around this area. So they're sort of backtracking from their previous claim that Russia was like hiding behind the power plant, and that was the reason why they had to attack it. And now they're just saying, "Oh, Russia's the one who attacked it." Those two things can't be true at the same time. They have to. One of those two narratives has to be wrong. So I'm inclined to believe that it was Ukraine that struck this. Maybe they had some justifiable reason for doing so, but they absolutely did strike it, and we know this because they did it before. We saw the kamikaze drones that are owned by Ukraine that were shot down, or actually did strike the power plant a few weeks ago. So that's just beyond debate at this point. Now, in the Zaporizhia region, besides the power plant being struck, we are also seeing the movement of troops from areas such as Melitopol, Berdyansk, and this is not in Zaporizhia, but Mariupol. These three cities, their troops are actually being moved towards the Kherson region, which is interesting because this is probably in anticipation of the counteroffensive that has been widely talked about, and Russia just wants to solidify the front line. And since they're not really taking the Zaporizhia front too seriously, I can understand this, but I don't really know why, because the defenses around Zaporizhia are probably the weakest out of all the Ukrainian defenses. They could easily break through if they sent some battalion tactical groups to the front line and actually pushed forward, but we have not seen that happen. Probably because there were priorities on other fronts, but still, yeah, it is something that I'm curious about. Now, in terms of casualties around the Kherson area, we have Russia report that 150 troops were killed or wounded over the past few days. They say they shot down 7 UAVs, 7 armored vehicles, 2 T-72 tanks, 5 T-64 tanks, and 1 M777 howitzer. So, yeah, you are seeing big losses in the Kherson area. Not necessarily in Zaporizhia, since the front line is much less active at the moment. But yeah, it does still it is still a big deal for Ukraine because they have failed to break through the Russian defenses, and they might just adopt a more defensive posture now instead of going on the offensive, especially with Russia sending one new battalion tactical group to Kherson on August 2nd, and they will be sending more reinforcements to this area from other parts of the front line, as I said, from like different cities in Zaporizhia, but also from mainland Russia and Crimea. So look out for that. Now, in Donetsk, we have news about the potential Russian offensive towards Pavlivka and Vuhledar. We don't have any concrete information yet about the success of this, but it was reported earlier today that Russia was launching an offensive towards these two towns. So keep an eye out for that. In terms of the fighting in the areas around Donetsk, we haven't really heard much over the past few hours about advances around here. The Ukrainians are sort of holding their ground for now. We'll see how long that lasts, but for now, they've been able to solidify and stop the Russian advance, but that's just temporary, in my opinion. In Marinka, there's still being a cleanup around this part of the town, so I can't say for sure that it is fully under the Russian control. Now, in Krasnohorivka, there is talks that the DPR forces have actually reached the eastern parts of the town. That's the only real change that I've made over the past few hours around here. Um, so that's a big deal, but it's not too big of a deal because still the front line is still pretty static now around the area, and it is a very heavily fortified town. So we'll see how the battles go there. In Pisky, the situation has also stabilized. So in this northwestern part, there's still some Ukrainian resistance. A lot of like demining operations going on around here, and that's just the situation around there. We're not seeing any advances towards Pervomaiske just yet. We might see some later, but first the DPR will have to solidify their gains around here, consolidate everything, and then move forward once the Ukrainian counter artillery is completely silenced and the troops withdraw from like Nivelske, for instance. Around Avdiivka, the same story. We haven't really heard much. There is an advance towards this other Krasnohorivka as well, towards the eastern outskirts of this town as well, which is interesting, but nothing um, really manifesting yet. Maybe over the next few days, we'll see an attack towards here, and then the scenario that I was talking about a few days ago would play out, where they take the coke plant. But we haven't really seen any advances in the southern or eastern regions today. Maybe it'll happen later on, but for now, there's nothing to report. Now, let's go to Bakhmut and talk about the situation around here. So, the Ragnar soldiers that made it to the street around here, they have solidified and entrenched themselves around here, and now they're starting to take over the open fields around Bakhmut in preparation for the battle. So, I'm talking about areas like here, basically this yellow highlighted area. This is where the fighting is going on, and the goal is to take over these trench systems to sort of overwhelm the AFU into retreating from Bakhmut, and then they could reach these other like towns north of Bakhmut, like Pithorodne, Krasnohora, and then also flank Solidar, because we haven't really seen much changes in Solidar as well. So all of this has sort of scared the Ukrainians, and they're actually starting to blow up their bridges. And the most prominent bridge that goes along the Bakhmutovka River was actually destroyed today. So this is no more. I'll show an image now of this area. So this is confirmed to be the geolocation for the bridge. And look, it's not intact anymore. Why would they do this? It's not because they want to stay on the eastern part of the city, obviously. It's because they want to withdraw from those areas. They see the writing on the wall, and they want to make it more difficult for Russia to advance further deep into Bakhmut. So they're sort of already conceding the eastern part of the city, while I don't know if they want to withdraw from the western part just yet. I think they'll stay there, but it is a worrying sign when you start blowing up bridges, because they did the same exact thing uh, in the Severodonetsk River around Lysychansk and Severodonetsk. They blew up some rivers, some bridges over there, and then we saw how they withdrew from the area. So history might be repeating itself. We also have a lot of Russian strikes on Bakhmut. Here's some images, and yeah, it is not a good sign for Bakhmut. It is being heavily pounded right now, and a lot of bunkers and trenches around the eastern outskirts of Bakhmut are being stormed. There's some footage of that the Russian sources did release. So I don't think there's going to be an attack head on Bakhmut just yet. They're going to first try to consolidate their gains that they made over the past few days, and also finally take over Kadema and Zaitseve and Vesela Dolina, which are still being contested, much to the chagrin of the Russian forces. Now, in Solidar, nothing changes as well because there was actually a Russian, not a Russian, a Ukrainian counterattack here. And this was actually defeated by the 6th Cossack Regiment of the LPR. And this counterattack was centered around the the plant over here, the Kanal plant. There was an attempt to take it back over, but the Ukrainians were pushed back. So that's another failure for the Ukrainians, but the silver lining, for them at least, is that there hasn't been any changes over the past few days around here. So perhaps that's indicating that the Ukrainians are not going to withdraw and that they will try to keep their defensive line around here intact for as long as possible, and that Russia has shifted away and is focusing more on the eastern outskirts of Bakhmut, and then they'll come back to Soledar later. Now we have some changes around the Slavyansk front that I want to talk about, but just a quick recap of what has actually occurred here over the past months, because this has been a very widely ignored part of the front line. We had Russia advance along the Oskil Reservoir and River, and then they actually took it over, and they, of course, took Liman later on, and then finally we had the Battle of Svyatogorsk, which expelled Ukraine from the northern bank of the Donetsk River. But since then, we haven't really seen much progress from the Russian forces. They did, for a time, actually cross over with some recon units and have a presence in Tatianivka, Prishib, Sidorov, but they were pushed out, and now Ukraine actually raised their flag over the Svyatogorsk monastery here, which is still under their control, evidently. So this has been a big problem for the Russians. They have failed to advance from there, so then there was another way for them to advance towards Slavyansk. It was through these two towns here, Dolina and Krasnopilya. So they were contested for a while, but Ukraine actually pushed them back and heavily mined these areas. Even in Bohorodichny, which is under the Russian control still, they have not really been able to expand the front line southwards. So they're really just stuck in the town itself, and they can't really make much ground. So Ukraine, they sort of took advantage of Russia ignoring this front line over the past month, and the fact that they were able to stall the attack on Slavyansk to actually go on the counterattack. And around here, they actually took back the town Dmitrivka, and they took back the town Dubrovne. And the Ukrainian sources, they report that Russia had to abandon some tanks and BMPs during the retreat. So if that turns out to be true, that surely is a problem for the Russians, but it's not catastrophic. It still is a problem when you're getting pushed back on a front line that you've neglected. But I don't think we'll see any like an offensive on such a large magnitude as we talked about in Kherson. So this is not really a replacement for the Kherson counter-offensive. Ukraine doesn't have those capabilities, and they should be putting them into other parts of the front line, not towards this obscure part of the front line that really won't amount to anything. They won't be reaching Izium. Look how far away it is. This is the southern part of Izium. This is Dmitrivka. There's no way they're reaching that. And if they even got close to there, then Russia would just send a BTG to the front line and push them back from their positions. It's possible that Russia is deploying the same strategy as they did in Kherson, where they actually withdraw from these towns just to get better positions and then just rain artillery fire down on the Ukrainians. And then, yeah, you could say it's a fair victory, but it doesn't really change anything, the dynamics of the front line. One thing in Donetsk that happened was that Mazanivka was also recaptured. My problem with it changing it on the map is that this polygon is very detailed, so actually changing the front line to look like this is very, very difficult. But just know that the front line looks something like this, and that I'll do my best to change it, but it just will take some time, so I couldn't do it before this video. Um, this almost certainly puts a nail in the coffin for any Russian hopes at advancing towards Dolina Krasnopilia and then eventually Slavyansk, at least for the near future. Maybe they'll come back to it later on, but for now, it is beyond their capabilities. Last thing is around here, still around Izium. There was a report that the 58th Brigade of the AFU tried crossing the Donets River around Protopopivka, and they actually did gain a foothold around this forested area and the lakes, but they got pushed back and had to retreat. So this is a common theme by now. I really don't see any way that Ukraine could actually reach Izium by now, but it is still a threat to the Russians to have them around here, which is why I was saying that everyone should keep an eye out for this area of the fighting over the next few weeks. We should see what will happen around here if Russia does actually try to push them back, and that would sort of go in tandem with these rumors that are starting to circulate of a new offensive in Kharkiv, which, if it happens, um, I don't expect it to happen now. It will happen later on, at least after Bakhmut falls and Solidar, and then like the Seversk line is also broken. But for now, I don't see anything really happening there. So that's it for today, and thank you all for watching. I'll see you later.